Well, thinking big, we have a very special guest today, and I want to welcome Gina Schaefer to the show. Thank you for taking the time to come on the show. And I'm just telling listeners right now, you are going to be inspired. And she has such a wonderful story that is really close to me. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Sean. I look forward to it.
Yeah. So we met, it's probably been a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago then, maybe. Yeah. God, it's been a while.
Maybe.
Yeah, almost 2 years ago since the first swing. So we met in Heroic Public Speaking, which is a speaking, a speaking academy, a speaking course, a speaking, however you want to say it for public speaking. And some of the things that you said in there were very close to me. So, part of my background, the listeners know my background. I was homeless. I was not making the best decisions in life, obviously on drugs. And part of your story is you actually help people that are struggling in ways that not many people do. So that story truly hit me that, okay, I really want you, on the show. I want to, do work with you because what you do or what you've done is so different than how most people run businesses. Most people do things. And it's just such a breath of fresh air of how you do things. So again, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about, God, there's so many things I want to talk to you about, but one of the first thing is kind of your entrepreneur journey. Most of the listeners, we're on here right now, we're entrepreneurs, we're starting businesses, we're trying to get things going. And whether it's, brick and mortar or whether it's an online business, you have done some incredible things in the entrepreneur space. Can you go back, just give us a little bit of your entrepreneur journey?
Sure. I wrote my first business plan when I was 12, and I won't bore you with going back that far, but it's really funny, like once I started building a business, thinking about that part of my life. But I had moved to a neighborhood in Washington, D.C. in 1997, that had been destroyed by the riots when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And the neighborhood really fell apart. There were over 1,000 people arrested or injured. There were over 300 businesses that were looted and then basically abandoned. And so it was this super diverse, vibrant neighborhood that fell apart. And it was fast forward to the early 90s, basically, it was a cheap place to live. And DC was starting to get really expensive. And there were a lot of these neighborhoods that really just hadn't been populated or repopulated. So I moved to that neighborhood because I could afford it. I got laid off from my tech job. I always wanted to open my own business. And I always say that I would hitch my star to someone else's wagon, then the wagon would crash because I got laid off 2 or 3, maybe 4 times. I mean, really, I try to block those memories from my brain. But it was like that was the mid 90s, tech boom and bust. And so I was part of that cycle. And I was young. It was, mid 20s, late 20s. And I had moved to this neighborhood, got laid off, and I knew the community wanted a hardware store. Buildings were being unabandoned. We were taking boards off walls. We were painting and doing our yards and all of those things. And so I came home from that last layoff and I said, I bet I can open a hardware store. And that set me off on this trajectory of really being an entrepreneur and really figuring out what that meant. And all of the struggles that go along with it and the challenges and blocking the negatives out of my mind and just sort of forging forward.
Yeah, you had not started a business before this
No.
store, this hardware store.
No, I had written business plans. I had talked about it. I'd probably gone through some businessy kinds of classes. I was a product of a wonderful liberal arts education right at the cusp of computers becoming a thing. So I didn't have a tech background. I was a political science major. And so, no, this was all brand new for me.
And so you said, okay, I'm going to start a hardware bit. For one thing, a hardware business I'm going to say it here, but for a female is not you don't see that very often.
You don't see it very often, but you know how it worked to my advantage? The media wanted to talk to the chick that owned the hardware store. And so we had so much press. So 3 months after I opened that first location, my husband quit his job and he joined me. So we've been business partners ever since. And he doesn't like the limelight, which worked out perfectly because everybody really just acknowledged us as a woman-owned business. And so they would, the newspapers would call the Washington Post, Entrepreneur Magazine, and so I really was able to use that to my advantage.
That is a great way to think outside the box and to use that to your advantage. Now,
yeah.
Looking back, like what are one or two things that, if you could go back to that time when you were just starting out that business, what things have you learned since then that you're like, man, I really wish I knew back then before this?
I had a conversation with someone earlier about this because it's an organization that's helping women get on boards. And I said, I wish I would have known to hire business coaches, even if in hindsight, I think, well, I probably couldn't afford it, or I would have thought that I couldn't have afforded it. The times where I've hired someone to really help me do something that's way beyond my comfort zone or on my intellect was super helpful. And so I think I took advantage of a lot of resources for sure. Our stores have about 25,000 items in them, which is a lot of stuff sold by a lot of vendors. And so we really took advantage of the vendor knowledge using those lifelines. But I wish that I had probably been a little more forth-thinking with business coaches or, executive coaching programs, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's it. Well, and I look back at that time frame and it's like back then for me, coaches were things that people who were on an improvement plan in corporate got. I don't think anybody was forward thinking back there. It's like, oh, he got a coach. He's got some issues.
He's on his way out.
he's on, it's do or die now. He better get his stuff straight. Yeah. Yeah. And I love it. Yeah, I think so. Coaches, and I think nowadays it's so much easier to be able to go out and find a coach or a mentor that has been there, done that. Or in essence, even if someone hasn't been there and done that, someone who can help you work through some of those thoughts, those ideas, and those thinking, and get those, get that imagination going, and get those, get that flowing. So I think that's huge.
Yeah, one of the things that I was fortunate to be able to do, I think folks who work in brick and mortar businesses, and we're brick and mortar, get stuck in our four walls, and we forget that there's a big world out there, and we let the customers come in, and that's our world. And so stepping outside of those walls, going to networking events, interacting with local business organizations, community organizations, once I had the time and breathing room to do that kind of thing, then I could start realizing that, oh, this works in other industries, maybe it'll work in mine, or this is what they're selling at these kinds of stores, maybe that'll work in mine. And it gave me a broader perspective, which was also super helpful as we grew. We opened the first store in 2003, the second one in 2005, and then one a year for 10 years. So it was just, nose down, find the next location. So there wasn't a whole lot of time to stop.
Yeah, to stop. And I think that's, one of the things looking back at my entrepreneur journey and some of the stuff that you're saying is we don't necessarily, or at least me, I didn't necessarily know exactly what I was always doing, but I was always trying to push forward. And it's like, it's those times when if you wait for when you're ready, or if you wait for the coaches to come by, or you wait for those, it's like, do it stupid. Like my first company, I did it completely stupid. It's like,
and you were a huge success.
But I did it. To me, you have to do it stupid. It's like nowadays, it's like I've started other ventures and done other things, and I thought way too much in them. I did them smart, and I failed. So it's like sometimes
it's sorry, it's real. I had a teammate once who said, "Can't we just stop and think about this for a minute?" And I said, "No, but really, it's because I didn't know what to think about. It was just forward motion because I didn't know. Just brute force was going to help all these stores open and grow everything."
And that's what it takes. A lot of times that is what it takes, is just to go. It's just doing it, taking the action, doing it, whether you think you can, whether you think you can't, whether you're ready or not, you just move forward and you just take action and do it, and stuff aligns out. It's magic how it happens.
Somebody told me years ago that 70% of all business ideas never get started because of fear. And you've probably talked to lots of people like, just get over your fear, just do it, take the leap. And so many people won't. And so those of us that do are maybe in that 30%. I don't know if that statistic still holds true, but think of what we've learned because we tried and we did it. And I had a CEO recently ask me if I would talk about my failures. And I really had to sit down and think about it, which sounds silly. It's not like I think that anything we've done is like grandiose, but I don't dwell on this. We had 2 stores that failed. I've had teammates who have left in unfortunate circumstances. We've had, challenges getting loans, all of those things, but I don't think about those things.
Yeah. So I think your mindset is different than most people in the sense that you look at things, from what I can tell, you look at things and it's not a failure, it's a learning. And when we have that mindset, it's hard for us to go back and say, well, I didn't fail once. Things didn't go as planned always, but I learned stuff,
Right.
and so it was never a failure. It was part of the process. And
Correct.
yeah, and one of the things that gets me is when I'm talking with people and they start getting on successful people that have failed. It's like, look at them, they failed. I'm like, yeah, because they did something. They took action, and it's like, that's how you learn. And it's like, I want someone to show me one person that's successful in anything, whether it's a chef or whether it's, a business owner, whatever it is, sports, that hasn't failed.
Yep.
You will never find a single person that's successful that has not failed. So it
Doesn't have one.
Yeah.
My husband likes to say that you have to have a 5 to understand what a 10 is. And he used to say that about meals because I'm a terrible cook. So it's okay if today's a 5, Gina, tomorrow I'll have a 10, or now I'll know what it looks like. But I think the same goes for starting businesses or any programs or policies that you put into place. You're going to have some that suck, and you're going to move through it, and you're going to make it better because of it. If you want to, I mean, you have to want that improvement to happen, but it just makes the successes seem that much better.
Yeah. And so one of the things that stood out to me on how you ran your business, or how you run your things, is you had, and it's part of what your book, and we're going to talk about your book, Recovery Hardware, in a second, but it's part of it. It's in line with that, is how you were as a leader, as a human, and as a person that had employees, and how you did that so different than most people do. Can you go into that just a little bit? Because my background. It's like, that is so.
Yeah. I know. I love that we get to have this conversation, and we have things in common that are not in common at all, obviously. But in 2003, when we were hiring our first employees, there was the felony box in DC was still a legal question on an application. And I had gotten the application, I don't know, from some city agency. And I remember thinking, oh, that question's rude. So we scratched it out, which was really banning the box before it had to be banned. And the very first teammate that we hired had been in prison for 17 years. And I like to think in hindsight that I would have hired him regardless had I left the box there and he had to check it. But I didn't have that piece of information when I gave him a job. And he worked with us for 10 years, and he was a wonderful part of our team. And so he started moments of empathy that I look back on with each person that we hired, and things that I learned from people who had very, very different backgrounds than I did. Our second teammate was in recovery for crystal meth addiction at a clinic up the street. And Shane came in, he asked me for a job. It's a very funny story in my book about how I said no forever because I didn't think I could afford him, and he just kept coming to work anyway. So finally I was like, well, I think I better pay you. But again, like, he was very fragile in his recovery process, and the support of having a job to come to. He likes to say to me, which I think is very flattering, that I was good at nurturing, not coddling. I do think of myself as a coddler, so that's why I love it when he says that. But I think the point is that we created a space where people could feel comfortable, they could be vulnerable, they could have crappy days, but they could keep coming back. And it's also a funny story with Shane that he left. He got very angry one day. He was, still very new in his recovery and was having a hard time. And he left the story, said, I never want to see you again. You're a terrible boss. Well, I was too busy to think about what that meant. Why am I terrible? How could I be better? Again, nose down, let's just continue. And about 2 years later, he came back, and we have been friends ever since. He's amazing. So those two people in particular started, and then he brought someone from the clinic who brought someone from the clinic who, and so on.
Yeah. And so I want to ask you a question on that, because a lot of times someone who knew that I was either in recovery, they tried to sugarcoat things. They tried to do things that didn't make me take responsibility for what I was doing. And it's like, so if you hired someone that was going through this, I would assume that you expected them to be just like any other employee. I mean, their expectations, you're not a charity there. You are a business that you're giving them a chance. And we, as recovering people, we have to understand that we have to take responsibility in our actions and what we do. And when we get coddled, it's harmful to us as a person rather than helpful.
Yes. I think I learned that really from Shane from the very beginning, how those boundaries and how that accountability was going to actually help in his recovery process. And again, some of this is in hindsight. I like how how you framed that, because what has happened over the years is people have, I mean, I've been called crazy, stupid, all sorts of names for hiring folks in recovery. And I always said, if you're going to ask me how many problems I've had, for example, hiring a returning citizen or someone in recovery, you have to ask me how many problems I've had hiring somebody who never went to jail and who never used a drug. Because in the workplace, it doesn't matter. I mean, to me, everyone is equal like that. And I started thinking about this actually when I was writing a speech. People use the phrase baggage. You know, he has a lot of baggage. I was like, damn it, baggage is luggage. And I like to go on trips. Like, where is that taking you? What can I, what from Shane's past is going to make him a fantastic teammate going forward? I'm pretty sure Tommy didn't know how to read, but Sean, every single customer that talked to him, like, left of his best friend and left loving our hardware store. And that was in the very beginning when we were babies. We didn't know what we were doing. And so we needed every customer to like us. And, they would come in and they didn't matter whether they were an attorney or a mom or a contractor. They would go see Tommy in the nuts and bolts department. He would talk their ear off and they would come downstairs smiling. And so you find those nuggets of just success in everybody.
Yeah. And it's like, if I look back at that time, it's like, yes, I was in a very bad spot, but that didn't make me a bad person.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's so well said. Yes.
Yeah,
I also realized over the years that folks who have used drugs or have been involved with the system have a lack of confidence that nobody recognizes unless you've worked with people like that. And so, like, one of my longtime teammates had a terrible confidence issue, but he was, 6'5", just this big guy. And I wanted to promote him. And so I took him for coffee. I'm 5'2". And so I'm looking up at this guy and he goes, "You can't bully me into taking a promotion." And I remember people around us being like, "Who is this? What is he saying to this lady?" But he wasn't ready. And really it was him knowing that his confidence was still kind of in the tank. And I asked him again, he told me no again. And then eventually he felt comfortable with saying, "Okay, I think I'm ready." And, whether or not he was ready or not, he needed to do it on his own terms. And part of it was recovering from his lack of confidence in his recovery.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's great. So on your book, so Recovery Hardware, and everyone listening right now with this, we're going to put a link in the show notes. It'll be in everything. So you will have the link for we're going to give them a download of the first chapter of the book. So that's fantastic. That is great. Tell us a little bit about the book itself. Like, why did you decide to write Recovery Hardware?
Well, I have a longtime teammate named Mark who's been in recovery for 22 years. I think is his anniversary this year. And in 2014, he came to me one day and he said, the community is calling us Recovery Hardware. And going back to people thinking it's interesting to talk to a chick that owns the hardware store, everyone had been asking me to write a book. And I was like, I am not writing a book about opening a hardware store. I don't know what I'm going to talk about, right? I mean, now I can think of things, obviously. But Mark came to me and he said, the community is calling us Recovery Hardware. And I cried that day. I thought that was the sweetest nickname that we could be given. And I said, I'm going to write a book now, and that's going to be the title. And I'm going to talk about what we've done. I still, Sean, am shocked when companies, I was meeting with representatives of a company recently, and they were talking about everything that they talked about in terms of hiring returning citizens, bringing people in who are in recovery, et cetera. And I said, well, who have you hired? Crickets. Nobody. So they can talk about it, but they're not doing it. And so I realized that it was special. I found lots of companies across the country as I've written this book who do the same thing, which might be the second book if I ever get the energy. But I guess it's not usual. And so I was glad to be able to write the book and tell the stories.
Yeah, it's I'm telling you, it is not usual. And I can tell you this, that, again, this happened when I was 15. So let's say by the time I was, 18, 19, getting my life together, I had to lie. There was no way that I could tell potential people that I was wanting to get a job with of where I came from. And that's one reason why it was so hard for me to talk about it for years. It's like, and I talk about this, it's like, to me, going through that it was like, remember the movie Fight Club?
Yes.
Yeah. Number one rule, you don't tell people. That's the number one rule. No. You don't say anything. And it's like, so to have that ability, or to have that mindset to be able to look past that and to actually thrive on that is just so big, and it needs to be out there. And yes, I assume there needs to be some level of, you have to be able to read people, and
Sure.
There's got to be,
Sure.
you got to have that, but you got to do that whether or not they've been through that or not. So
That's exactly right.
So it's like, but it's such a great thing. So who is this book really like? Who is the perfect reader for this book?
So I think there's two perfect readers. One, I think, are business owners who are trying to do something different, who want to be part of making the future better. Historically, government regulation allowed companies to be discriminatory, which heaped the shame on, folks like you who couldn't get a job and wouldn't be willing to talk about it. So I think businesses who want to see that it can be done. I don't think anything we do is special. I think it's something that everybody should do. And then I also think folks in recovery who just want to know that there are people that, there are companies that care, that you can find a workplace that's transparent, or where you can, the concept of bringing your whole self to work is talked about, but I don't think that's always the truth. And so I think that's really the second big audience. But there's lots of nuggets in there of, creating core values and leading a team and accountability. I have a favorite chapter of an employee who was fired, who ended up coming back because he missed his job so much. But there, we had an attendance policy, and he violated it. So as much as I really loved him, I had to let him go. So.
Yes, and I kind of wanted to get. I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to get down to that, because to me, the stuff that's in recovery hardware, what's in your book, is not just applicable to people who are in recovery. This is a blueprint, a guide, whatever it is, for really leadership in business, in any. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's great that it's for recovery, and that's very important, but there's nuggets in there that are for everybody, that it doesn't have to be that. It's like there's such good stuff within everything that I've seen in the book. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. Usually if I'm on a stage or I get a chance to talk about it to a wider audience, the first person to come up after the event to talk to me is someone in recovery who wants to thank me, which is always super gratifying. And the second is usually a rising leader who wants to say, I didn't know that I could do it that way. And both of those conversations are always so, it makes all of the pain of writing the book worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are you doing now? So do you still run your hardware businesses, or what's Gina doing now?
So 2 years ago, my husband and I started selling our business to our team through what's called an ESOP, an employee stock ownership program. So we've sold 30% to the team so far, and I stepped down as CEO. So he's still the CFO. I'm building a speaking career, causing havoc wherever I can, telling these stories with as many opportunities as I can. And then we will probably officially transition to 100% ESOP at probably 7 years, 5 to 7 years, I hope. So
that is great.
The protests in 2020 and 2021 that were really happening all over the country marched right down in front of our office. And that was really the kick in the pants for us to figure out what we could do to be part of the solution that all the protesters wanted. And the things that people were marching about was generational wealth and, equity. And we had an opportunity as a small business to do just a little bit. So my cashiers can say they're owners now, which is really cool.
Oh, that is fantastic. And there's not a lot of companies that are doing that.
There's 6,000, which is not many.
Yeah.
And, there's so many, if you've read or talked to anyone about the silver tsunami and all the businesses that are ready to transition because of the baby boomers, there's so much opportunity now. There's either consolidation happening or, business exiting that can create these opportunities to sell to employees. And the program is great. It's regulated by the Department of Labor. There's great tax benefits. It's not inexpensive, and it's not easy. And of course, my husband had to do all the work. So I could say it's as easy as I want. But I do think that more people are hearing about it. It's becoming more of a buzzword.
Yeah. So I would grade him over a 5 on that move. So I'd say that was close to the 9, 10. Yeah. That was above the pie.
It's up there. Thank you.
Yeah. So you're speaking, again, that's how I met you, is we were going through and trying to, do, I learned that I had to get better on stage. I mean, for what I do, it's like, I got on some stages with some big people. It's like I was on stage with Les Brown. And I was like, okay, now I understand. I need to up my game. I was like, I'm
terrified for you.
I'm like, oh, this did not go good. I need to up my game. That's why I went to, heroic public speaking. Now you are truly going to using heroic public speaking, using your speaking to really push this movement that you're talking about.
Yes. I have a couple topics, but the two main topics really are empowering women in non-traditional fields, which can go in a lot of directions. It doesn't just need to be women. It's adaptable to new leaders for sure. And then also talking about transitioning employee ownership and just succession planning, which is something that, people told me for years when I first started, or asked me, how are you going to transition out? Hardware is a very generational family business, and I don't have children, so that wasn't going to be an option. But I was too busy to think about it until I needed to think about it. And so, just having those conversations early with business owners is the couple that I've had so far has been impactful. So I hope to do more of that.
Yeah. So do you see people do so I went through kind of an employee owned thing back in the 90s, I want to say, with a company I was with. I was with a big food company, and they switched to employee owned, but they screwed the employees. It just went.
Makes me so mad.
And there's things in place now that, and the reason I brought that up is there's things in place now that they can't do that. It's like it's now regulated. Back then it was like they, probably 100 times value and sold it to the employees, and then just left, and it was it was not a good thing. And I'm glad that there's laws and there's things in place now to where that can actually happen successfully.
It's very regulated because of stories like that, which is so frustrating for me to hear about, because there are amazing employee-owned companies in this country, and then there are a lot that died for that reason.
Yeah. And for me, it's like nobody works for a company harder than when they own the company.
Yeah.
And that's just...
Well, and it's just so... Sorry. Go ahead.
No, and it's just how it is. It's like no one's going to work harder for you than if it's your company. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's really gratifying to talk to a teammate who wants to tell the customer that they own part of the store. And that part's not easy either. I mean, it's a constant educational process. And so employees become eligible to join the ownership group after a year of service and 1,000 hours. And so, which means that we constantly have somebody joining that group.
Right.
So we have to keep educating them, which has made us, at least me, it's made me have to study more, because each time I talk to a new teammate, there might be a new question or a new... I had one guy years ago when we first started who said, I own stock in Pepsi, but I'm not an owner. Don't patronize me. And it's different,
right? But
it also made me realize that it's not like, all of a sudden everyone's going to think that this is an amazing opportunity. They have to understand what it means for them. And it doesn't change your day-to-day paycheck. And so for folks who are working in the city, particularly in retail jobs, it's not going to change that. It's going to change how you retire from that job. And so hopefully that makes our jobs feel and look and become more professionalized with a longer runway for that generational wealth.
Yeah. And do you think, so if companies that are looking to do that, do you think that is also a good mechanism to have really good retention in your employees?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of statistics that prove that the retention at companies that are ESOPs is higher. We've tracked turnover as a retail business for probably the last 10 years, and it's good for retail. I mean, retail turnover is horrible, so the bar was set really low. Ours is really good, but this is just an added layer, particularly for our salaried folks. So going back to that weekly paycheck, I think the folks who are working for an hourly wage, I want them to go somewhere else if they have the ability to go somewhere else and make more money. Like, we're really limited with what we can pay at a certain point to run brick and mortar stores. But our folks who work with us who are salaried, which of the 260 or so is about 35, our tenure is over 8 years. Yeah. And this is just an added, that should hopefully keep a lot of them in this career for a longer period, because if they wanted to manage a retail store somewhere else, they would not be an owner, for probably not,
right.
And would have a lot. Our team has a lot of autonomy, and I've heard from other retailers that would not provide as much autonomy. So,
yeah, well, I think that is a great business model and a great, just a great way for leadership. I think, again, I don't think many people have the leadership skill that you have. In the way that you can get people, you can retain people. So so everyone that's listening, go get a copy of the book, because I'm telling you, it's not just about recovery. And that's a great story, and there's great things in there, but it is a good business I think it's a good business book. I mean, it's so I think there's a lot to be learned within the book itself outside of the recovery itself. But
Sean, I think of people like you as non-traditional teachers. And so if like Mike, who's in the book, who was formerly homeless, I learned so much from him, but no one would expect you to learn leadership skills necessarily from somebody who slept on a park bench for years.
Right.
And that's really what I wanted to convey in the book, that we can learn from everyone. We can become, I mean, they all made me a better person for sure, but definitely at least thinking about how we lead and run the company. So much of that came from non-traditional teachers.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I learned more on the street and more coming up. I think I learned more going through what I did than going through a 4-year college. I
totally agree. I'm sure you did.
Yeah. I would not be where I am today if I had not gone through that, if I didn't have that resiliency, if I didn't have that, but again, it didn't happen until the day I took 100% responsibility in my life. Yeah. And once that happened.
And it worked. Yeah. And you made it work for you, which is really the important part there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I read this really great book the other day about a gentleman who had spent some time in prison, and he said, I don't want to say that I would want to do it over again, but what I am today and what I'm doing and what I learned is because I had that experience. And so you can see where there's some nuggets in that. I would never want you to relive what you had to go through, but clearly you have gleaned the positives from it and used it to your advantage.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like your philosophy in business. I never failed. I was just, I was learning. That's all it was. It was just a learning journey. And it's the journey, it's the learning I had to go through. And again, I wouldn't have it any other way either. It's like, and what's funny is I look back at then, and of course I was so poor I couldn't pay attention. Like the food was scarce, but I was happy still. So it's like, I still didn't, again, I think I was too stupid to fail back then. Just like in business, like I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be like that. It's like, this is how life is, and I'm enjoying it. It's like, hey, stuff happens and it's not exactly the way I planned, but hey, I went through it stupid and came out, Do it stupid.
I used to say I was stupid. Somebody finally said, just say you were naive, Gina, because I used to say I was stupid too. And I was like, all right, maybe I was really really naive. I
was so naive, I couldn't.
Well, and, despite your circumstances, you had a very positive attitude, and, youth, there's some expression about something's wasted on the youth. Anyway, we don't know what we don't know, and we're too young and dumb to be upset about it. So it works.
I think we're built that way for a reason.
I think so too.
It's part of our built-in DNA. Yes. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on with us. I'm going to have you on again because especially when the second book comes out. When is that coming out?
We'll talk about that another time. Yes, we will.
Oh, but Gina, thank you so much for coming on. And again, listeners, go to the show notes. We're going to have the link to the book. We'll have links to contact Gina, and best of luck on that. And I can't wait to see some of your new speaking gigs. Big stages. What is your dream stage? Like who is your dream audience? Like if you look at 2 years from now and you want to be on a stage, what does that stage look like?
I've defined this a bunch of different ways, so I'm not sure if I can be super articulate. I really want to speak internationally because I love to travel. And so I just feel like it's a good way to combine my love of going to new places. And so for sure. And the bigger, the better. Like I really like really big audiences. I love Q&A in smaller groups, but I want, stages over 1,000, and I want to be able to travel to do it. And I have a potential opportunity in Ireland in the spring. And so it would be my first real international experience. And so we'll see. And I think audience members, I really like talking to business owners. I really think, the entrepreneurial spirit is just, I get so much energy from it, which you need if you're not surrounded by people all day. And so,
yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing some of those stages.
Thank you so much.
It's been such great time in the last year and a half getting to know you. Now, like when I first went into HPS, I still have huge limiting beliefs, even though I've done many things. It's like I was the shy one in the corner. I did not want to get up on stage. I paid a lot of money to get on stage and still did not get on stage. So it's like, but it was a huge learning thing. So you probably noticed that I was very quiet.
I did, and it's so once your story came out a little bit more, a little bit of it might have made sense, but I'm going to give you a little known secret, and this is my own insecurities. Everybody who's taller than me, I think, is automatically more confident, and you are a tall man, and I am a short woman, so I'm like, oh, he's got this. He's probably already a pro. He's making thousands of dollars speaking. and you're like, oh no, I'm not. And then, the conversation we had about why you really wanted the scale was different too, because I started that class thinking everybody in the class wanted to be on big stages. And so it was cool to see what everybody wanted to use it for.
Yeah. It was such a good, diverse mix of people, both from what they wanted, what their goals were, what just a completely different way of looking at things.
I'm still in touch with so many of you. And so it's a good support network too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially for speaking, Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you so much. And I look forward to talking with you again in the future.
Thank you, Sean.